I think sometimes when you're really in something deep, the minute you allow yourself even a little unhook moment, like a tiny little, let me just peek outside, that I think is much harder on my brain because now I'm like, oh, now I'm actually unsure. And I think you can't be a great leader and have that kind of unsure show through. Because so many people are depending on you. They're coming to work every day. They're looking you in the eye. They're like, are you into this? Like, are we going to be great at this? And I think you have to reflect that back at them. Not like in a naive, don't worry, everything is going to be great, but just more a bedrock way. Like, this is important and we're going to push through no matter what.
Hi, I'm Jubin, operating partner at Kleiner Perkins, and I'm excited that you're tuning into Grit. The goal of this is not for it to be a highlight reel of how successful my guests are, rather a candid exploration of how hard it is, both personally and professionally, to create, build, and scale world-class organizations. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks. Can I revisit the conversation we were just having, just like about the public market investor thing?
Yeah, totally.
Like,
You do you.
Why do you think the aperture closes?
Why do I think the aperture closes? Well, number
In
one,
terms of curiosity.
Number one, they don't get the benefit of just being able to take kind of in some ways intuitive bets on things.
Because it's all data oriented, you're saying.
It's much more, I mean, that's a little unfair. There's definitely strong intuition, but it has to be data backed. Like by the time you're investing in a public company, you have to be able to put it down into a DCF, like the why you think it's a good return. Now that DCF might have a lot of intuition written into it, but I feel like as VCs, and particularly earlier stage you are, honestly, data is probably not your friend. Data would tell you, don't invest in this ever. Because most new things that are truly going to disrupt the world, there is no way to describe them TAM or all the boring business terms we use.
I think that's right. So are you still at like...
What's my status?
What's your status?
I feel like I'm on a dating app right now. Are you still... Did I just make you blush? I love that. So inappropriate.
Are you still at Nextdoor?
I am still technically the CEO of Nextdoor for another week.
Okay.
Till May 8th. So through Q1 earnings.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were supposed to do this 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And
right.
I got an email from someone on your team at, 5:30 in the morning saying...
Not go to work today.
Sarah got sick. And I'm like, damn it. I was so excited. I was so bummed. And then 2 hours later, the announcement comes out. And I was like, oh no. And mainly it was a selfish oh no. I was just devastated that the idea that maybe I was going to get robbed of this conversation with you. So anyway, I'm glad to be doing it.
We stick to our word around here.
I'm glad to be doing it. Can I ask you about this?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
It's no secret. Yeah,
okay.
It's all good.
Okay. What happened? like I don't know.
Yeah.
Like what happened?
I mean, frankly, I'm 5.5 years in.
Yeah.
I actually think it's like, unless you're totally founder driven, I actually think change is good, even at the top. I think from my own personal perspective, I feel very ready to do something different, to have a different kind of whatever that new route on the journey is. There's so much going on in tech right now. I'm hyper curious by nature. You're going to find this the more we talk. And I felt ready to go out and find that next thing.
So you left.
Yes. So I pretty much got to that point where I was like, I have done the best I can with Nextdoor. Like when I joined, I felt like it was a lot of turnaround. So rebuilding the app itself from the ground up. Like when I joined, we were the private social network for your neighborhood. Today, we're the place you can connect to the neighborhoods that matter to you so you can belong. So we tried to go much bigger and broader and not so small. Built a team, took the company public, shored up the balance sheet. Nextdoor's really ready for its next big burst of what's coming. And I think a founder coming back is kind of a really nice set of hands to put it back into as well, because you're not teaching someone from scratch. What a pretty complicated, like social media networks, they're complicated. You have to really understand your graph. You really have to understand who your customers are, what that whole ecosystem is. So it felt like the timing was right, frankly.
And so it's going back to the original founders. The original founder is going to be the CEO.
Nirav, yeah. Nirav Tolia is coming back to be the new... He's been on our board for the whole time.
Okay.
So it's not like he's been at some distance. We talk all the time about the company, about what we're building and so on.
When did that feeling start for you?
Of wanting to make a change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and when I say feeling...
That's a good question.
When did you start to think that either there's a better person to take the reins, or you were getting antsy to do the next thing?
Yeah, it's a great question because in my 5.5 years of Nextdoor, there's really never been a dull moment and rarely time to kind of pause and think. So, year one, 2019, we needed to raise capital. We needed to kind of restart a lot of growth and so on. 2020, COVID happens. In some ways, COVID was the best of everything you could imagine for us. Like our DAOs doubled overnight. Suddenly, me having to explain to people this power of local.
Because everything became hyper-localized.
Everything became hyper-local. Like me telling you why your neighbors were important was no longer a moment where you just glazed over. But you're like, I totally get it, because where else am I going to get toilet paper? Or how am I going to help the elderly person that lives next door get their groceries? So 2020 was both a beautiful thing. It was also a moment when I'd say one of the tougher parts of neighbors interacting also came to the fore. So George Floyd's murder happened. Black Lives Matter came, as a phrase that we all started to really know and talk about. That for Nextdoor was also a hard moment because you were dealing with bad things on the platform, like when neighbors are not good to one another. So that caused a whole investment in kindness in communities that are more minority communities and so on. We can talk about that. So that's 2020. 2021, we take the company public, not a small thing. 2022, half of 2022 was awesome. This is when I'm leading my best life. I'm like, I love what I do. It's perfect. I've figured out all the circles are aligning. And then at the end of 22, inflation kind of started midway 23, 22. It didn't really impact our business until the tail. And then 2023 was just a slog where I felt like, okay, the ad market has collapsed. It's variable spends, first thing you cut back if you're worried about your own margins. Yep. We're still not quite the biggest platform around. I don't want to use the word subscale, but we're still building our brand. We're still being known as a place to come advertise. So advertisers who are being conservative with their dollars are going back to the big platforms that they know and trust. And it was a very hard slog, 23. So you asked me in the beginning, like, when did I start to think, is there a change? I think that's when I was really digging deep in myself and saying, okay, am I the best possible leader here? I actually don't know. And that's probably the first time where I had I actually don't know. I think up till then, if you'd asked me any day, from the day I joined that company until about midway through 23, I would have said, hell yeah, I am a great leader for this company. I'm so all in. And then I think you both get mentally tired. You feel like you're not doing the best possible work of your life. I always tell people, when you come to work for me, the one thing I will guarantee you is we are going to do the best work of your life because I'm going to make that happen. And I wasn't sure I was making it happen for me or for the company. And that's when I started to think about, okay, what's next? And clearly the board also had input here as well. And so it was, a conversation amongst both parties of what's the right next step.
Yeah. And the stock was getting hammered along with the ads, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that makes you question, like, am I the best person here? Because the upside of being a public market company is, right, you've raised money, your balance sheet is, we have over $500 million on the balance sheet. You have not free access to capital, but a lot easier than being a private company. The downside is your equity starts to reflect into your own mind how successful you're being. And no matter how much I tell myself, like...
Meaning stock was down 70%, Sarah's 70%.
You're like, I'm 70% worse, which is totally stupid. In fact, one of the best things, there are many great things about working with Jack Dorsey, but one of the best things is Jack wouldn't let you ever talk about the stock. And it was because he fundamentally believed that we're A, so much more than our stock price, but B, like in a given day, if our stock is up, we haven't done that much better that day, or down, we haven't done that much worse. And that you're in a psychology of the market, right? Nextdoor is a smaller cap stock, still working towards profitability, that's going to have massive multiple compression in a tough inflation-driven risk-off environment. But no matter how much I know that, because I was on Wall Street for over a decade of my career, you still feel like you're getting a grade at the end of every day, and it does not feel good. And that just has, I think, gets into your psyche a lot.
Yeah. And do you feel like that impacted your ability to lead effectively? Like, do you think that, let's just say the company went public at $4.3 billion and then $2 billion market cap or whatever it is. I guess in the middle of 2023, when the feelings started to creep in for you, I think, especially in technology, every founder felt that. Like it was bad, really bad. And every CEO felt it, every founder felt it. And you start to ask yourself, at least they would start to ask themselves, like, what have I actually gotten myself into now? And I think the reason that I originally asked the question of how did you know is because this was the first time in at least 5 years where tech truly secularly got very difficult.
Yeah.
And it was a gut check for a lot of people. The reason I asked the question is just, how do you know when it's time to push and push through that feeling of discomfort? Because everybody had it, or not. Were you trying to parse through those different things? Like, you know, the inner monologue in you saying, no, Sarah, like this is your time to dig as deep as you possibly can.
Yeah. So I'm naturally inclined to that.
Yeah.
Right. I am a big believer, if you're going through hell, keep going. And I never think from the outside, you can be involved in a lot of success. And people write this narrative that it was easy or it was obvious or whatever. And they forget how tormenting it is at times. Like when Square went public, we similarly had a very hard first year and a half. People forget we did a round before we went public, which you all were investors in. If I do it in dollars per share, it's a little easier for people to understand. It was $16 a share.
And you were the CFO.
I was the CFO. We went public, like our strike price on the IPO was $9 a share. The stock popped on the day to 14, felt better. And then it just bled downwards for about the next 12 months to, I think we got as low as $7 or $8 a share. That did not feel good. But what did I do? What did we do as a team? We dug deep. We pushed through. You know, by the time I left, the stock was at $100 a share. So like, it was kind of I'm like, gosh, like the right thing to do is dig deep. I think in the case of Nextdoor, a couple of things were happening. It was almost where we were in terms of the cycle of the company. And I think we've done a lot of the optimizations, and I think it needs a big push through on the product side. And that was where the board was starting. I have a board that's still very VC oriented, really pushing hard on product innovation, product. I definitely started to second guess myself there. I think a little unfairly. Like I've proven in prior instances that I can really build products, come up with products intuitively and build them from scratch. But I started to second guess myself. And then I started to get into a mode of saying, okay, given where I am right now in my career, my life, if I'm going to dig deep, you're digging deep for another 5 to 7 years. Because that's kind of the life, in my mind, the life cycle of like a next thing you go do. It could be the thing you're in and you're like, okay, the next era of this thing, or the new thing you're going to go do. And I think what I was questioning in myself is, am I the right person for that next 5 to 7 years? Is the company better going really deep again into product? In which case, who is that person that's just passionate about that every day? Versus, I think I'm broader. I like product, but I also like selling. I like being with customers. I like positioning and thinking about the why and the purpose mission of the company. I want to be able to do all of those things. And right now, the best option might be more singularity. Not to overuse, not AGI, but singular focus at the company. And I think the board was asking for some of that too. And that, I think sometimes when you're really in something deep, the minute you allow yourself even a little unhook moment, like a tiny little, let me just peek outside, that I think for me certainly is much harder on my brain, because now I'm like, oh, now I'm actually unsure. And I think you can't be a great leader and have that kind of unsure show through.
Yeah.
Because so many people are depending on you. They're coming to work every day. They're looking you in the eye. They're like, are you into this? Like, are we going to be great at this? And I think you have to reflect that back at them. Not like in a naive, don't worry, everything is going to be great, but just more a bedrock way. Like, this is important and we're going to push through no matter what. And I was starting to feel like, okay, there are probably other places I could go and be more potent. And I think Nextdoor could also do well with a leader that has that more singular focus on product, which is what Nirav's bringing right now.
Totally. That makes sense. And when you were getting pushed around product, and maybe you're pushing yourself or others were pushing you, but the product needed to evolve for the company, I guess you could have just hired a badass product leader, let's just say.
Yeah. You have a really good product leader in place, actually. Yeah.
You could put a couple more, whatever, right? You could put some more ammo there.
Yeah.
Do you think the board would have said, okay, if you said to them, I'm going to dig deep for 5 years, I'm going to bring the founder a little bit closer, we're going to collaborate more, we're going to do some things here. Do you think they would have supported you?
I think they would have if I had been like, I'm all in, no matter what.
5 to 7 years, this is the deal.
Yeah.
How certain are you that you made the right decision?
Oh, God. One of the favorite things I tell everyone is life is not an A/B test.
Yeah.
So the good news is I will never know. So I just don't spend time on
You don't stay awake at night. Once the decision's been made, you do not look back.
No. I think you can always I like retros. I like going through the process of like, what could we have done better? What were some of the decisions we made? Like, what do we expect to happen? What actually happened? What would we add next time? And. But I think endlessly cycling through prior decisions, I don't think is a good use of energy.
And you said 5 to 7 years, like as your kind of maybe mental mark of commitment. Is there anything behind that? Like, why that time frame?
No, there's not like it's our prior lived experience. So my Goldman experience was 11 years. And I really think back on, I probably felt like I stayed too long. I knew I wanted to operate. I waited a bit too long. By the end, I was definitely very stale. And so 11 feels too long. I also had 2 kids. So sometimes I want to cut myself a break that there was a reason why I was good at what I was doing, but I also had a lot going on. Square was 7 years, Nextdoor 5.5 years. It gives you long enough to have multiple cycles, right? I mean, maybe conversely, I don't like looking at people's resumes when they move jobs every 18 months. And I actually have a thesis that what happens is like when you start a job, it's like anything, you're so excited. Oh my God, it's like the best thing that ever happened to me. I will use my baby analogy because as a woman, I've had 2 of those. Please. I can talk about this. It's like you have a baby. You're like, this is the best thing ever. I love this thing. 6 months in, you're like, what the hell? This thing doesn't move. I am not sleeping. I am so stressed. Like also true with your job. I kind of don't know what I'm doing. I'm not seeing upside. And so that's a hard moment for a lot of people. The people who can stick it out and get to 12 months, you get to that point where now you have some expertise. You understand the company well enough. You're starting to make a difference. But it's like anything, there's cycles. An economic cycle might hit. A company cycle might hit. Usually somewhere in the 18 to 24, you come off that high of like, oh, now I'm having all this impact into, oh, what's my next thing? And if you can push through that, and like your podcast called Grit, like have the grit to push through that, I think that's actually when you really start to have multiple tours of duty in the same organization where you are truly making a difference because you now have both formal power to make things happen, but you have a lot of informal power because you know people, you know how things get done, you understand the culture, you have successes, you're kind of accredited at this point. And so I love to see people who have gotten through into that kind of 2-3 year. And for me, there's even something about getting into the 5 to 7. I think after the 5 to 7, you need to ask yourself, are there other experiences I could go get that I'm not only getting at this company? Now, there's some companies that go to the moon. Like, I don't know, if you were employee 10 at Amazon or employee 10 at name any amazing company, you can almost have like a brand new job every 3 to 5 years. And I mentor people on that all the time. I'm like, you're bored with your job? Don't go look for a new one. Go get them to send you to, I don't know, Taiwan or get them to send you to France or just go do something that's so different that you're really afraid. But in a smaller company, that can be harder. And so sometimes you do have to make that jump. And then, when I went from Square to Nextdoor, I was solving for other things that couldn't be solved at Square. And so sometimes as you get more senior, it gets harder. Sometimes you do have to do that next thing outside the company.
Yeah. You said that your circles all aligned in 2021 in reference to like you were firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So I love this framework called Ikigai, Japanese framework. If you don't know it, it's 4 circles. It's what you love, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, what the world needs. And then the 4th circle is, and you can get paid for it. Because if you do those other 3 things, it might still be just a hobby.
Can you say it one more time?
So what you love, what you're good at, because those 2 things aren't necessarily the same, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. And if you are at the bullseye of those 4 circles, the Ikigai framework says effectively you're in flow. And when you're in flow, it's not just a mental state, it's actually physiological as well as psychological. Like a lot of the research came from blue zones. Like the reason why it's Japanese, why do people in the blue zones of Japan live longer? And it's because they've found that peace in the middle of those 4 circles. And so, if I look back at my career, if I think about Goldman, I was good at it. I mostly liked it. I definitely got paid for it, but I don't even think another equity research analyst is what the world needs. Square, I felt like I was getting much closer to those pieces, but in some ways, as Square got bigger, the passion of being a CFO started to ebb because my role by default actually had to almost become a little bit more narrow again because I was now the CFO of a multi-billion-dollar public company.
Yeah.
And so I had to spend time talking to investors, for example, doing the whole quarterly earnings, getting on the road. I'm very good at it. I just don't get a lot of passion out of it. I can't wait for now that AI is going to create, future Sarahs. It's great.
That's right. That's right.
At Nextdoor, I'd gotten into the zone of I was good at my role. I felt I was really building the company successfully. I was passionate about it. I love the community aspect. I felt it was really what the world needs. Like fundamentally believe that these grassroots knitting communities back together is so needed. We can talk about epidemics of loneliness, the disintegration of people into very polarized camps right now. I think a lot of it is because we've lost just the empathy of being human. And then I was getting paid for it. So I felt very much, I was working probably harder than I've ever worked, but I felt really in flow all the time. I felt so energized. And it's a beautiful thing. Like when you can make that happen, it's phenomenal.
Do you ever, I know you're not a rearview mirror person, but.
No A/B tests.
But do you ever think about the alternate universe where if you made partner at Goldman, you'd still be there? Like, could that have been?
It could have been, and it very likely would have been. I think because at that stage in my career, I was still a lot bit still the Sarah who's perfect. What I mean by that, I think as a young girl, was always the A student, always top of my class, always did the right thing, went to the brand names, went to like a great university, and. It was like a very logical path. And not getting that partner thing was the moment of freedom. It's a great lesson to be learned about how sometimes the thing you want most is exactly the thing you shouldn't get. And even in the moment when it can feel devastating, it is such a gift. Now, I didn't see that. My husband, I've talked about it in other podcasts, was the one who said to me, they just gave you freedom. Like you can stay and go for it again, or this is the moment where you can go do the things that give you joy. Like I didn't know the Ikigai framework at the time, but that would have been a great framework to have been using.
When you were growing up, first of all, where'd you grow up?
Northern Ireland.
And
not Ireland. It's a different country.
That's right. And was that pressure imposed on you early? Did that come from within?
I think a lot of it is internal. My parents are pretty simple folks. Like, I mean that in a very good way. My mom was like the local nurse. She was the district nurse. So she did everything from birthing babies to like somebody had a heart attack. She was first on the scene. My dad was the personnel manager of the local mill. They both left school when they were 16. My family's all farmers, like very much like not business minded. So I have to think that at least a chunk of this drive that I have has to be something that's internal. But I think also you just start to build expectations, right? People want to see you succeed because you're succeeding for your village, you're succeeding for your school, you're succeeding for Northern Ireland. You feel this build of people starting to not so much depend on you, but you're doing it for them as well. And again, is that internal to me? That's probably part of my own value system that puts a lot of pressure on myself. But I think it also is a way to shine a big light so that you start cutting a path that others can follow you on.
But it feels to me, again, this is just an observation 30 minutes into talking to you, that pressure has not dissipated. Meaning the commentary that we initially had you're shaking your head no, around your value being tied to a stock value, very much implies to me that that pressure still exists all these years later.
Oh, it absolutely does, right? You think you get to a stage in your career where you're like, I've done a good job. Like, I am not that person. I am so driven. It's a side of myself that often people may not use words like she's very competitive or whatever, but I am, hell yeah, really competitive. And yeah, I don't think it'll ever leave you. I don't view it as coming from a negative space of, like, I don't tend to frame it in phrases like fear of failure, or sometimes the perfection thing is there. But I just view it as so innate to who I am, and never being satisfied, always being curious, thinking that there's always a next kind of mountain to climb. And it's what gives me a lot of energy.
Do you think you're going to work forever?
My husband says I only have an on or off switch.
That makes sense to me.
There's no dial here. I believe I will work forever. I hope that over time I find ways to think about work not only in a pure work in a company sort of way. I think there's many ways that you can have impact in the world.
You're going to go to venture? No.
No.
Tell
I
me
work too hard for that.
Promise me the next job is not going to be in venture.
I will promise you that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm quite sure. I want to operate again.
You do?
Yes.
You want to go run another company?
Yeah.
If you could wave a magic wand, is there a company that hits your bullseye? And obviously, this is not you proclaiming you're going to go take that CEO's job.
Exactly. I don't know if there's a company. I think right now, rubric-wise, I would say I want to work in growth again. Nextdoor was more of a turnaround. And it's not that growth is easier. It has just as many crazy things happen. But I'd like to work in growth. I want to stay in tech. I've had a lot of inbounds over the years of like XYZ, big company that you'd know the brand name of, please come and help us become tech-enabled. I don't take that lightly because, having the privilege of sitting on the Walmart board, Walmart's a company that's become incredibly tech-enabled. But number one, you need to be a great merchandiser. You need to understand the consumer side and then be tech-enabled. So I want to work in tech. I love tech. I've spent my whole career in tech, and tech has never been more exciting in my mind. So growth, tech. I actually don't really care that much about size of a company. Both Nextdoor and Square were 200 people when I started. Like, I'm probably not your 1 to 10 person, but I like small. I don't have like an ego around having to have a lot of people to kind of prove my worth, but I'm also not afraid of big. I do think this purpose, mission element, like I want to be able to talk about something I think matters in the world, because I think I deserve that, frankly, at this stage of my career, to work on things that I think really will impact the world. And I don't mean this in a dismissive way. Often I say it more in terms of like, I love shoes, but I don't want to go work for a shoe company. They're not going to change the world. I definitely buy into the Silicon Valley view of like stuff we work on can change how humanity functions.
So you're not going to give me a company?
I'm not going to give you a name.
Okay.
It's more because I don't have a name.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm serious.
You're telling me that is such a lie. That's fine. It's fine. I'm not going to press you, but there's no way that's true. How long are you going to take off?
Minus 10 days.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
But you're antsy and eager, or are you like, man, I'm exhausted?
If you talked to me towards the end of last year, I was more in the man, I'm exhausted. It was more than just the market and work. It was a lot of personal stuff too. I think that's the other thing you forget about as a leader. You are still just a human. So, I think everything from my daughter is a freshman now at university, but it's a really big deal when your kid leaves the house. Like, people tell you it's a big deal, and I was like, that's not going to be me. It's fine. She's coming back. No, it was really a big shift in like, you've had a kid for 18 years, always in your space. Number one. Number two, actually, I had a very good friend pass away. Like a big kind of moment of like, wow, okay, life is short. People will tell you, we're all going to live to we're 100, so you're already halfway there and stuff. You don't know. Like, it could be over like 5 minutes from now. So that was eye-opening. I think it was a gift from Rick because he had leukemia, so he passed away kind of over a more elongated period. So we had a lot of talk about what it felt like. So that really weighed on me. And so I felt really tired towards the end of last year. Now, I think mentally, I feel really jazzed again. Like I feel very energized, and yeah, I'm trying to not make decisions too fast. Like everybody gives you you should take an entire year and not talk to anyone. And people are like, you should talk to lots of people right now and then step away and ruminate on what are the first principles. I don't know. We'll all find our own path of what's right for us. And, for me, I'm just saying yes to everything at the moment. Just having conversations, going to things, getting the energy. I'm just hyper curious. I get all my energy from that interaction with the world.
When you were leaving Goldman, you were an MD there. You spent 11 years there. You're right. The pedigree was essentially, it's the murderer's row of logos at this point. Oxford, McKinsey, Stanford, and then Goldman. Did it not cross your mind to go to I don't know, just like, go be a partner at Morgan Stanley? Yes.
Of course. No, it really didn't. I'm super loyal and I tend to work in places where I really believe. And so I have a ton of respect for major banks all over the world, great friends at Morgan Stanley. But I knew if it was not Goldman, I didn't want to go work somewhere else. Like 11 years in.
Can I ask you a different way? Mm-hmm. This is what I actually wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. Were you not on the financial treadmill? Did your lifestyle not ramp? Did your burn not increase proportionally to your wages increasing?
It did and it didn't. You
If
gotta
that's
remember.
too forward of a question.
No. I think it's actually a very good question because I would think a lot of folks who are listening in, this is like what I see happen. It's exactly it. People's burn rises and then they're eternally trapped. I've talked to more people wanting to leave Goldman Sachs who are like, but my bonus this year. And I'm like, it's the worst place to put yourself.
Yeah.
Look, I grew up in Northern Ireland on the border, tiny little town with very little. So I don't need a big burn rate. My husband would laugh at this now, but I don't need a big burn rate. Uh-huh. And I think if you get yourself into a mode of money being your driver, it's nowhere. It is, you can get paid. It's one part of Ikigai that you have to, it's not a hobby. But if that's your only driver, I just think you've kind of lost your plot. I mean, I would take your burn rate way down and give yourself just the freedom to go explore as a human.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think from personal experience, money has never been a driver for me, but it has been a scoreboard for me.
That's true. That's actually true. Don't conflate those two things. Don't hear Sarah say, I don't care if you pay me. That is not true.
Yeah.
Steph Curry cares about, does he need another 10 million? But he does if he sees someone else getting paid that level.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That is very true. And that is something that I've learned to be more vocal about over time because people can misrepresent or mishear me say, I'm not in it for the money or money is not my driver as me saying, so you can underpay me. Right. And that is not what I'm saying at all.
That's right. And were you in New York at the time?
No, I've always been out here.
So let me ask you a pretty practical question around this Goldman thing, leaving. You had kids yet?
I did, yeah.
You had 2 kids already? Mm-hmm. So you have 2 kids and do you have a house? Do you have a mortgage?
Yeah, got all of those
things.
All
those things.
Yeah.
Practically speaking, lowering your burn rate is not that easy, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you went to Salesforce to be a VP of Finance and Strategy, and then Square a year later to go be the CFO. But Square was a 200-person company. I mean, that's a big jump.
Oh yeah, you are coming. I mean, I was like, God, if I take another job after this, I really will be earning nothing at all. Because when I went from Goldman to Salesforce, I remember at the time my boss is an amazing man, Graham Smith, as a CFO. He was like, you're going to take this salary? You're okay with this? I'm like, hell yeah, because I need to learn. I'm going to drop all the ego things. I need to learn. And I'd actually had this great, I came out of Goldman. I was like, I'm going to go be a CFO somewhere. And I remember having lunch with this recruiter and everyone else had been like, oh, you'd be an amazing CFO. And we'd love to have it. All you VCs were like, go to this portfolio company. And he was like, you don't even know what a CFO does. You actually need to go learn before you step into a role. And it was great advice, but it did mean you had to subsume ego to some degree and say, okay, I'm going to go tell all my Goldman friends that I'm now the head of FP&A, and I didn't really know what FP&A was, which is why I actually changed the title of the group to Finance and Strategy because I thought it sounded better.
Yeah.
now in hindsight, better lucky than good, because that meant I could actually go recruit a very different type of person, which I think made for a broader finance team. But yeah, my salary came down. Then I went to Square. I was like, what is this equity thing? My children cannot eat equity. Yeah, it was kind of a scary moment of time. Now, I have a great partner. And while I'm all about female empowerment and I am my own person and I have made my own way, it's also nice to have been able to trade off, because he did a startup when I had this steady job.
Yeah.
And so we were able to
Makes
balance.
sense.
And so in the end, have a great partner is also a good piece of advice at the beginning of a career.
Can I, all the ego things you mentioned, so like burn rate's one of them. The other thing that I have observed is this idea that, are people going to take my call? When you leave Goldman, are people going to take my call? Is my worth to the rest of the world going to still be the same if I'm the FP&A person at Salesforce versus Goldman? And as someone who, gets a lot of intrinsic value from work, was that going to be like an attack on your character in some way? Like some perceived slight in your mind? I don't know. Did that ever cross your mind?
When you work as hard as I do, or we all do, it's hard not to somewhat define yourself by your work. And, research in particular, you're the name, right? It's kind of an interesting, I realize in hindsight, you're the ultimate IC. Like you are the name on the research, even to the point where I would see things happen. Like when I was out on maternity leave, which lasted all of about 2 to 3 weeks, because investors wanted to speak to Sarah, not to my team, even though I'm like, by the way, these people are doing all the work. Like you should talk to them. Like many of them know the stock better than I do because they've done but they still, it's like a brand name. And so stepping away from that, I definitely had some worries, but it's actually not something I spend an inordinate amount of time or energy on.
Yeah.
You just can't. You will be amazed yourself if you make a choice to leave any situation. There will be amazed on both sides. You'll be amazed by the people who reach out that you might not expect. And you'll also be kind of sadly amazed is the wrong word, disappointed by the people who you never hear from. But it really is a great moment in time. You get these moments in time where you get to see a little bit someone's true kind of self.
Yeah. Charlie Rose, who's like one of my favorite interviewers, I've been going through the archive and I watched a Trump interview with him in 91. And independent of whatever you think about the guy, he was describing this feeling of he had just gone through like hell. And he was like, Charlie, I was very surprised by the people that I thought I was very close to that never called me when I was going through a hard time. And I was very surprised by the people that I thought I wasn't that close to who all reached out to me for nothing other than support in those lower times. I don't know. Anyway, just kind of reminded me of your commentary.
It's completely right. And it's a good thing to remember in yourself too, because it's not just about you in this moment. Like there are many people constantly maybe going through a change, and just a light touch, like a quick text or whatever, goes such a long way. And you never know. Like, you're just kind of filling the bucket with each of those people. And sometimes amazing things come of it, and sometimes it's quiet, but just that little human kindness moment when you expect nothing in return, that is super important in life.
Yeah. Salesforce for a year?
Yeah, a little over a year.
What happened? Why not? Why didn't it work? Did it work?
Oh, it worked. It was amazing. But Square came knocking.
Yeah.
And Square was just, again, it was just this crazy moment where I saw it was tech plus finance. I'd come out of a bank, so fintech. When I wrote kind of the analyst report in my head of like why I felt it would work, it had all of the tailwinds behind it. And then I met Jack and just totally hit it off. Like we actually did an interview on Mother's Day, which was not Jack's doing. He didn't know, but This is
Jack Dorsey.
Yeah, Jack Dorsey. We ended up on a Sunday morning at the Blue Bottle next to Mint Plaza, which is where Square was headquartered at the time. And it was supposed to be a 45-minute interview that ended up being a multi-hour conversation where we never even got to anything about business. It literally began with Jack saying, "Tell me about you." And I was like, well, I worked for Gold. And he was like, no, tell me about you. And so then we talked about growing up in Northern Ireland. We talked about him growing up in St. Louis. We talked about our families. And it was just clicked. I'm like, I want to be in the orbit of this man. I think he is kind. I think he's really intuitive about the world. And I think he's he's just a big thinker that's going to go places.
Yeah. And did you feel like, well, shit, what about the commitment I just made?
For sure. So a couple of things. So I was a year and a half into Salesforce. It was about a year and a half. First of all, I was very grateful to Marc because he took a chance on me when maybe most people wouldn't have. And he'd been a mentor for a couple of years before that. I think number two, I loved my boss and I was learning a ton. However, I had built a really good, solid, strong team, even in a year and a half. Like I went in, I think I inherited like 90 people. I think I cut it back to probably about 30. I did a lot of trying to upgrade. And then when I was leaving, we were about 150. So that's actually a lot of change in just a year. But we'd really got strong building blocks in place that I was very proud of. And so I actually felt like I'd given them the push up and felt great. Even to this day, I talk to people at Salesforce who'll say, oh, we still use the Sarah Friar model for quota or whatever.
That's
I'm
awesome.
like, okay, that's crazy. You should redo that. There's this thing called AI. You should use that now. But yeah, it's cool to have left your mark in a short period of time. It was tough to tell Marc because he's someone who really values loyalty. Oh, yeah. You got to go look someone in the eye. But he wasn't, in that moment, he wasn't happy. But about 6 months later, I had a call from him and something. I'm like, okay, I'm forgiven.
Do you value loyalty?
I do.
Do you believe in loyalty?
I do. Yeah, when I recruit, I always say I recruit smarts first, loyalty second, experience a distant third.
But what about this idea that people aren't loyal, like companies aren't loyal to people? Companies are loyal to the best interest of the company, whereas people are generally loyal to their family, right? Like maybe other opportunities.
I disagree. I think, first of all, companies can be loyal to employees, assuming that the contract is strong. So the employee is doing great things and really kind of building shareholder value. I think companies can be very loyal in ways big and small. Like it can be loyal in terms of maybe repotting you into a job that in some ways you have no business being in, but we're going to give you a run at it. Like I just took in Nextdoor, our head of Australia really wanted to be in kind of brand marketing. She has a lot of intuition for it, but she's not schooled in it. So we moved her into that role. That to me is a loyalty moment because I believe it's going to be for shareholder value. I think companies can also be loyal to people. Like Marc is a great example of this. There is no one kinder. If you have something personally come up, he will... Benioff. He will go out of his way to show you that moment of kindness or loyalty, which makes you so loyal to him in return. Like it's almost asymmetric, small thing, but it feels so big in the moment. And then vice versa, I think that people are very loyal to people at companies. Like times when I've been dragging people through that hell, they are coming with me because they're with me. And a lesser person might have said, this is crazy. We shouldn't do this. I'm out of here. But they will stay because they trust that the person's going to do right by them.
Yeah.
And again, it can be big ways and small ways. Like it's okay to leave a company, but you should always, like to me, the measure of someone is not how they enter, it's how they leave. So things like, showing up to your manager and saying, I've taken another job. I've already accepted. I work out my 2-week notice. That's not loyalty. Now, it doesn't mean you need to stay for a year, but being much more thoughtful about how that person on the other side, what you can do for them to make it better. Like I remember back in my Goldman days, one of my young analysts was leaving and she pulled an all-nighter the night before she left to finish a report. I'm like, I will remember that for the rest of my career. And if she ever needs anything from me, I am all in because that was just, whereas I've seen other people just disappear. They oh, I've got a week of vacation. I'm going to work out 2 weeks notice, but I've got a week of vacation. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah. Marc being compassionate. Can you put a finer point on that? What do you mean? It felt like you were emphasizing, that was something that stood out to you.
Yeah, so here's an example. So when I left Salesforce and Marc was not super happy at the time because he values loyalty, I was at Square and my EA's husband suddenly, out of nowhere, went to have a doctor's appointment and got diagnosed with cancer, effectively in the appointment. And they didn't know what to do. And she called me crying. She's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I was like, let me just text Marc because, he knows UCSF inside out. Let's find who's the best person for this type of cancer. And so you would think Marc Benioff's a pretty busy guy. I sent him this text. I'm like, 1% chance he comes back to me. A, he's a bit pissed with me right now. B, he's busy. Seconds. Here you go. I've called them. Tell them to drive over right now. They're waiting for them at reception. That you cannot make up in life. That is an amazing just moment of compassion where he did not need to take that time. It almost like you can see, I get a little tearful just thinking about these moments when people do that just incredibly human thing for you when they're not getting anything back.
Yeah. Wow. When you think about winding down now at Nextdoor, how do you make sure, obviously this wind down process has been happening for a while now. What do you think about to make sure that you leave the right way?
Yeah. I mean, number one is like running through walls right till the end. So whatever it is that the team needs from me, I'm there. And like everyone would tell you right up until 2 weeks ago, I finally kind of wasn't in the office anymore. But I was like, when the news first broke, I think we broke it on a Friday, I can't remember. But coming to work on Monday, we have our stand-ups for the week. And I think everyone's a little bit like, what's this going to be like? And like I was talking to someone afterwards, they were like, yeah, I asked what it was going to be like. And they were like, it was so weird. It was like nothing had happened. Sarah was still there. She was totally on my ass to get this thing done. She had been in the documents all weekend. She had left all these comments. I'm like, yeah, because we can't slow down. Our customers need us. And so I think showing that is a way of just instilling confidence that, hey, there's no gap in proceedings here, right? I kept calling it business as usual. Like we're back to regularly scheduled programming. So number one is that. I think number two is making sure as you transition to a next person that you're taking that time to really sit down with them and not just hand them over, like, here's the documents I use or here's the plan that I've been on, but like it's really living it with them. So Nirav and I have been kind of running alongside now for multiple weeks, like even probably into months at this point. And then as you get out the other side, there's kind of a moment where actually the kindest thing you can do is just be gone, because anyone who's a little on the fence or not sure tends to come talk to the person that's leaving. And that's never good, because no matter how authentic you're being about why you're leaving, there's still like but you're leaving, right? So you almost have to like then totally disengage yourself. But then I think there's a moment, for some people it's weeks later, for some people it's months later, where you're there for them. I always say, like, you know how to find me, call anytime. I do so many like walk and talks with people, just as little kind of insertion points in their career. And that's been true of people I worked with at McKinsey, at Goldman, like the whole way along. There's nothing I love better. When you joined Square, there was, call it 200 people. What was the state of the business? Oh, God. It was interesting. It was growth. So the good news is we had product market fit at the low end with the little reader, and word of mouth was just helping us grow, which is a beautiful thing, right? That's product-led growth, right? Now now we talk about it like a thing, but you got to remember in Square, that was still, PMs were still learning how to be actually a discipline. Yeah. So product-led growth was absolutely there. That said, we had a couple of like pretty extraordinary moments. We had done a deal with Starbucks, which had negative gross margins. So we had to this day, if you talk to anyone in my cohort, we say, let's not try to make it up on volume, because that's not going to, we have negative gross margins. So that's, still a joke. So we had to do a lot of renegotiation, trying to figure that out. That was kind of painful. And then there was a big change, like about 6 months in. Keith Rubois had been our COO. Keith had run a lot of the company, and Keith left. And so it was a big moment of like, how are we going to manage this company? How do we bring in an executive team? And so we were going through a lot of bumpy moments on the road. And you've compared it to Swiss cheese, which is like one of my favorite analogies. Can you talk about that? Yes, it's actually, I'm stealing this from my husband, so I'm going to credit him with it. Good. He's like, company. So after I started working inside of companies, he's an investor. He's like, oh my God, companies are like Swiss cheese. They look so perfect on the outside, that kind of eat them like or whatever, red, everything looks perfect. And then you go inside and it's freaking holes everywhere you look. So that is what operating is like. Isn't it funny now, though, that everyone thinks about Square as like this perfect upwards to the right
linear trajectory.
And it was not. It was so far from. This is what I mean about, when I say I want to work in growth companies, I think people hear easy. I'm like, no. Growth is not easy either. But it is, you can make a lot of mistakes and still end up with tremendous success when you've got that tailwind.
Yeah. When you talked about going back to growth as your next opportunity, do you think that part of it was because you were a first-time CEO? And so maybe you weren't getting looks at the 80% growth companies because the other multi-time CEOs were also going for those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple things that go on. Number one, look, let's face it, great growth companies don't tend to need to change out their CEOs, usually in a very extraordinary circumstance, because CEO is usually relatively happy, right? They're manifesting everything that they want to manifest, and boards are very happy because growth is happening. I think number two, yeah, you're a first-time CEO, so people are having to take a chance on you. They don't know if you can be more multidisciplinary. And I came from a CFO, COO track. Others might come from a product track, you name it. But the question is, can you go broader? But a big part of it is like remembering that your job is not to do everything in the company and be a brilliant marketer, a great salesperson, a wonderful product person, a great engineer. Your job is to like decide what you're good at and passionate about, do that, and then hire a great team around you. I also think, honestly, women don't get like the prime candidates. Like there's a lot of conversation out there about, not just the glass ceiling, but the glass cliff. Like a lot of women end up with the big turnarounds. My wonderful friend Francoise from Square always calls the women get the ugly babies because she has this wonderful French accent, and it weighs on me about thinking that through and really trying to make sure that there isn't some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, a selection process going on that means you're not getting the best look at the great companies.
Could you go be the CEO of Twitter? I'm just thinking out loud right now. Like I'm literally just thinking out loud right now.
I should have added to my rubric. I don't know if I want to do more social media at this point.
What if Elon called?
I would love to have a conversation with him about many things, but not social media is its own
Why is that?
Special. I don't know. I struggle with it has so much of the zeitgeist of society going on around it that instead of just being able to focus on the product that's in front of you, you also end up caught up in almost everything that can go on in the world. And it can be very distracting, but you can't call it distracting because it's actually part of the product. But it does get very distracting a lot of the time.
Do you think you could have taken the Brian Armstrong apolitical work as a place for work stance at Nextdoor?
No, I don't think it would fit the culture of our company.
Yeah.
Like when you're a company that's about cultivating a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood to rely on, it's very hard to then say, but when we come to work, we're completely utilitarian and we are never going to talk about any kindness towards one another. I think you have to allow for the type of people who come to a company like Nextdoor are very, very purpose-driven on that community aspect. Like they tend to be people that also in their neighborhoods are community activists. Totally. And so when they come to work, they expect a community. We can debate if the right word is community or family or, work is work. I think in Brian's case, people have real passion for the crypto industry. I get it. I sit on the board of Consensus. I am a huge believer in Ethereum and distributed computing. But it's a different form of, you can come to work and be supremely passionate about that, but the work itself, like your colleagues don't need to turn into this family for you.
Totally. I think that makes sense. Jack wrote a very nice tweet on the way out. Do you remember what it said?
Something about being in rocking chairs together. I was like, what are you talking about, dude?
Were you bummed when you left?
Was I bummed?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I felt like I had the best CFO job ever. I loved the team. But again, I wouldn't have left if I didn't think that they were completely set up for wild success.
But like using your own, was there not another
tour of duty
within Square?
No, there wasn't. And when I looked at Nextdoor, I'd really not looked at anything because anytime people called, I was like, nope, I am not interested in any other CFO job in the world. And I didn't get that many inbounds on CEOs. Like, we should be clear. Back to your original premise. Like, is she ready for it?
Yeah.
They were starting, but I think it was a three-fer at the time. Number one was, I was actually very taken with this idea of neighborhood and community. back to where I grew up and what community meant. And growing up in a war zone, you suddenly really appreciate what community can mean, and equally when it all goes pear-shaped, how bad it can get. I think number 2 is I felt like I was ready to lead at kind of a CEO level. So I was ready, but I also felt like it was something the world needed too. And this might be where maybe I just get way in my own head about things, but it also is part of the drive that we talked about earlier. But I really had spent a bunch, I have a nonprofit called Ladies Who Launch. I spend a lot of time in front of women starting, running, growing their own businesses. I'm always telling them, take the risk, make the plunge, do the thing. And I was like, well, why am I not doing that? And I wanted to show my daughter, anyone looking up, like, hey, a woman can be the CEO of a publicly traded company and do it really incredibly well.
Mm-hmm. What surprised you the most about being a CEO?
In hindsight, and I hate it because I think it's such a trite statement, but I fear, like now I'm kind of a believer of it, it was very lonely at times. Not even just at times, a lot of the time. Because in that CEO seat, you sit kind of at the nexus of a board that is opinionated, that wants to do things, that often is impatient, that's not in the day-to-day running of things, so wants to go faster or wants to pivot. And then you have a whole company, first your leadership team, but then a whole company that's in the soup every day executing, that either loves the strategy we have, so doesn't want to make a change, or can't pivot that fast. And you're kind of stuck in the middle. I felt like, I'm like, I hope I'm turning into a diamond here because the pressure is quite big. I was talking to someone about it 2 weeks ago at an event where it was a bunch of CEO and founder types. And someone said something I thought was really interesting. They said, oh, what you were missing was a co-founder. He's like, that's what my co-founders are for, where we can go in a room and we can laugh, cry, scream, rant, rage, and rave, figure out what we're going to do next, and then come out, and then we can talk to the board, talk to the company. But you really had almost no one that you could just let all that out with. And I think that was right.
Yeah.
And that might be on me too. Maybe I just didn't cultivate that 1 or 2 people around me, like your mentors or whatever. But when they're not in the fray with you, it's not the same.
Yeah. And all that said, you want to do it again?
I think I do.
Yeah. What's a day look like? Do you have an average day?
An average day when I'm kind of full blown at work. First of all, I'm a super early riser because of working on Wall Street on the West Coast for so long in research. So I had to work market hours. So I'm a 5 a.m. sort of gal. And I work out. First thing I do is work out.
Every day?
Every day.
No matter what?
No matter what.
Trainer at home?
Yeah, I have a gym in my house. I hop on elliptical. I do some weights. I try to persuade myself that I do some stretching and stuff. I never do that.
Yeah,
I'm way too impatient.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to work out because I think that's the moment where I can feel almost my stress levels coming into a place where I'm like sane again. Because I'll often wake up and churn through things in those early hours.
Do you check your phone before you work out?
I'll have a glance at text. I usually look at text, Slack, like the 2 things where I'm like, if something urgent's coming in, they're probably coming in those 2 veins. And then once I get on that elliptical, I will do a quick clean through my inbox. Very good for your core, by the way. Also doing your inbox while you're working out. And then I put it away, and I'm still a CNBC junkie, so I kind of watch what's going on, broadly speaking, in the economy.
Yeah. I have found that one of the best things for me, because my brain immediately turns on when I wake up, is for 10 minutes from when I wake up, I turn my alarm off, and then I immediately flip my phone over so I can't see any notifications. Just the 10 minutes from getting up, brushing my teeth, getting the coffee going, and then sitting in my chair. And then when I have the cup of coffee in my hand, then I'm like, now day, you're allowed to take over, you know? Then I'll go do a workout and everything else, but I'll kind of like flush the system out that way.
Yeah. I like to get going first with the workout because what I find is if I start responding immediately, like unless it's super urgent, I'm responding often in a place where I still have too much adrenaline flowing and not enough cortisol. And so I need to kind of start the anti-adrenaline kickers to come in to slow me down a little.
That makes sense.
And frankly, if I've glanced and seen a bit of what's going on, my initial response in the moment versus my response an hour later after I've worked out can be very different because I've just slowed everything down. And I think that's true when you're making decisions. It's true when you're in stress. If you can just create enough space, like sometimes it's a matter of seconds. Sometimes it's being able to just walk away for a moment in time. I think it's so healthy.
So call it 6:37, you'll be done?
So early, yeah. So call it 5:30, I'm in the gym, done by like 6:30. At that point, I probably will go to my office, take a quick look through things. I normally leave if I'm, depending on the whole work from home or not, but usually if I'm going into an office, I leave around 7:30. But in that hour, I mean, I also have to like get a kid kicked out of bed.
Yeah.
Make sure, right now I used to have 2 of them. Now I've got 1, make sure he's on it, whatever he needs to, so and then I'm mom for a little while.
Yeah.
And then I've learned to use a lot of what I call my white spaces. So I've typically had a car service since actually I was at Square, and one of my board members said, you should do this because that commute time, 45 minutes to an hour, is really good brain space for going through your email, maybe reading what's out there in the world that's gone on. I mean, I still read a lot of research and notes that come in off the desk. Like I'm inquisitive about the world, and I really try to go beyond tech. Like I still get a paper because if I curate my paper, suddenly all I'm reading is like about AI right now. Versus if I get a real paper, I know what's going on, broadly speaking, in the world. And I love that. And then, when I get to work, that's where there's no typical day. And you're you have to be careful to not let your inbox lead you. So I actually try to step away at that point and go push my inbox to the end of day. I try to do people things first because I think they're the hardest things. So I like it when my brain is the freshest to work on people things. Maybe it's you're interviewing someone, you're having a difficult conversation with someone, you're doing a review with someone, like whatever it is that's very people oriented, I will do in those first couple of hours and really try to prioritize that. Or maybe it's a negotiation, like something that involves high brain power. And then I try to push the things that are a little bit more rote, like one-on-ones or reviews, product reviews or whatever, into the afternoon so that I'm, it's not that my brain's still firing, but like you're maybe running on less like just high altitude push.
Yeah. And how often generally were you working from home versus taking the car and going to the office?
Most recently, kind of 2 days a week at home, 3 days a week in the office.
Okay. That makes sense.
I like my commute. During COVID, I had like one of these moments where I was working, like I could work in a home office that was above our garage and I had to walk down some steps, walk into the kitchen. And I started to say something and my husband turned to me and he said, "We don't work for you." I was like, "Ooh, I need a commute." And he's like, "Yeah." So then I started actually hiking. When I work from home, when I end my day at work, I go out and do a walk or a hike for like 45 minutes so that I can come home and be human to my family when I'm not traveling.
Right. And then you'll come home and then what? What happens when you get home from work? What time is that usually?
Yeah, home probably 6:30. Then I'm mom again.
Cooking?
Yeah, we kind of trade that off, but I actually love to cook. I just don't have any time these days, but I will definitely put something together. Then I'm checking, is homework getting done? Like you're just mom, like your kids need you. Like my daughter loves to play games. So like we might play Scrabble or something. Like she's now a freshman in college. Like it's not cool anymore. But when that was cool, we played a lot of board games.
Yeah.
And then usually when the family's cycling down and maybe turning to TV or watching sports or something, I am that bad person that lifts my laptop onto my lap and I just crunch through my inbox at that point in time.
On the couch?
On the couch, yeah.
While TV's on or whatever?
Yeah, because when I was growing up, my husband often says that I have a remarkable ability to not hear anything going on around me, which is absolutely true. And it's not just that I'm ignoring him. But when I was young, like when I was growing up and doing my homework, we lived in this tiny house. So like I did my homework in the living room while the TV was on all the time. And there wasn't like a private place to go per se. And so I think I just learned to be incredibly focused. And so I kind of like having white noise when I'm in something.
So you'll crank through for, call it an hour or so. Kids will start going down to bed.
Yeah.
And then if you're waking up at 5, what time are you going to bed?
I'm usually like 9:30. And then I read, so I'm probably asleep at like, call it 10. I mean, I believe in sleep. I'm not like a crazy person who's going to tell you I only sleep 4 hours a day. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Like I think you absolutely should be getting a good 7 hours.
Yeah. Oh, and then sorry, before I get off the day-to-day of Sarah.
It's like so bored. Like, really?
No, in many people's minds, you are the picture of high achievement. Okay. And so sometimes people just want to know that what they're doing is also the way that other people that they look up to do work.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I like listening to that too. Like when I listen to your podcast, I'm always interested in how human are these people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or like, are they doing something different? You know, on the weekends, how much do you work?
Yeah, I do work on weekends.
Because you mentioned earlier that you were going through like a document, putting comments in over the weekend.
Yeah. In the end, I just don't think there is a substitute for hard work. Like if you're putting in 40 hours and I'm putting in 70, I just think I'm going to, in the end, create more than you.
Yeah.
Now you might be absolutely brilliant, but that's like, I would take that histogram of people who work hard, and I think you'd find they're predisposed to also have successful outcomes. I mean, I do. So again, I love being outside. The reason I don't live in the city is I need green. Like I grew up in this kind of very bucolic green farming community. So I actually need the outdoors. I also get up early at the weekends. I love to get out hiking. My kids have both played a lot of sports. So I'm usually going to a sports something or other. But again, back to like fitting stuff into the white spaces. And now I'm going to sound like a psycho to your listeners. But, I often would say drive a kid to wherever, to my son plays soccer. So once I'm there, there's an hour while they're warming up before the game starts. So I literally will take out my laptop and then I would start doing whatever I need to do. I love to write.
Like on the bench. Like on
in
the stands.
In the car, like super uncomfortably. Usually,
sun goes, gets out of the car. You say, "I'll see you on the field.
I'll see you in an hour."
See you in an hour.
And then my son will always be like, "You're going to miss the start of the game, aren't you?" Because well-known fact, I will forget.
Freaking Sarah Friar is literally in
her car.
No way.
In the front seat, and like it's crazy because when you live in California, you suddenly are like, "Oh my God, it's like 110 degrees in this car." Like I forgot to screw down the windows, or whatever. But yeah, and one of the practices I have, if you work with me, you'll know, is I've always had this hygiene of writing a letter to the company every week. I did it, when I was an analyst. I had something called the frequent Friar. It's a terrible pun, that I would write to investors that was not research per se. It was just my impressions of the week that passed. Like, what did I read? What conference did I go to? What anecdote did I hear? That was my piece of research that people loved the most. And so when I got to Salesforce, when I got to Square, whoever was on my team, you would get some sort of email from me every week. And sometimes it would be, okay, I want to go a little deeper on recruiting, how I think about recruiting. And sometimes it might be like, here's literally what happened this week. For me, it's actually almost a decompression of like, I'm downloading my brain, I'm forcing myself to synthesize a skill that I could get better and better at. And then I'm sending that out in the world as my gift to you. You don't have to read it, but I'm also sending you a little bit of a signal about the pace that I expect us all to be revving at. And I've definitely had people say, hey, I get your email at the weekend. It kind of implies to me I should be working at the weekend. I'm like, that might be what I'm implying, actually, because I haven't been in a company yet that's not in a fight to the death. So we need to be working at a pace. Now, I want people to find balance too, but my balance is not your balance. Like, you also need to have accountability for what makes you tick. But I feel less stressed when I get that email out on Saturday, and then usually Sunday afternoons, I'll start to pick up my laptop, do some more reading, whatever is coming up on the docket for the week that's coming.
Yeah. Could you imagine, I don't know, waiting till Monday morning after Friday to respond to emails?
Could not.
Seriously, could you? I mean, do you know a single very high performance person that does that?
No. And in fact, it's almost like the more crazily successful they are,
the more responsive they are. 1,000,000%.
I could pick my phone up right now and text Doug McMillon, CEO of Walmart, Fortune 1. I bet within the next minute, he will respond back to us. And it's not that I'm special. He is so responsive. Now, you might say, well, doesn't he just get eternally distracted? You need to be careful of that too. But I just find really successful people I do the do, delete, or delegate. Like the minute I get something, am I going to do it? Am I delegating it, which should be delete should be your first port of call. Do I even need to worry about this? And then delegate next. Can I send it? And then do should be the smallest piece because you're still going to end up with a full plate.
Yeah. I like to consider myself hyper responsive, and there's a tax with that because you're basically always on, but it's a very easy way to lead by example by just because there's like a network effect to your responsiveness, if that makes sense. And I think it matters.
Oh yeah. As a CEO, you're the pace setter. Like you are absolutely the person setting the pace. Everyone else is going to end up being just a slight bit slower than you end.
Yeah.
So whatever pace you've decided, like I did crew when I was in college, so I'm super into rowing. Like whatever speed you've decided the boat is going at, like how many beats a minute are going to go into that water, no one else is going faster than you. They're all slightly slower, milliseconds slower. And I think that's true in a corporate environment too.
There is a Twitter account called Tech Emails. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
Oh my gosh. It's basically just...
Is it better than the Goldman Sachs elevator?
It's unbelievable. It's old emails, okay? Internal tech emails. I'm going to send you this after, okay? Internal tech emails is what this Twitter account is called. And if there's lawsuits and whatever, all of these things, all the correspondence come out.
Totally.
And I'm so sick in the head. Obviously, I've basically read through every tweet that's ever come in this account, but I like watching the timestamps of how responsive Steve Ballmer and Steve Jobs and Satya are. And you're right. It's almost like the more important they are, the quicker the responsiveness is. And what blows my mind is they'll write paragraphs, essays in some cases, and it'll take them like 10 hours to respond, not even. Like 5 hours. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll send it to you.
I'm in. I'll be following it before you know it.
I had Mark Cuban on the show, I don't know, a few weeks ago. Cold emailed him, responded immediately. Every correspondence that he and I have had since then is legitimately, I shit you not, he has never taken more than 10 minutes to respond to me. Never.
That makes me so happy to hear.
How insane is that?
Yeah, it's the best.
Anyway, if this was it, line in the sand, you're retired. Would you feel like you didn't leave it all out on the field?
For this moment in time, yeah, I'd feel like I...
Would you feel not successful?
No, I would feel like I had given it my absolute all. And I think I'd feel successful. But now you got to define success. I was actually just having this conversation at lunch about, this David Brooks, the Road to Character or whatever, but there's your eulogy, there's your resume virtues and your eulogy virtues. And how do you want to be remembered? And I actually always feel it in podcasts because podcasters always start by like, oh, we've got Sarah Friar. She's the, now former CEO of Nextdoor. And I'm like, that is your resume eulogy. But I don't want to be in that moment. Again, I'm Irish. We're very morbid. We think about death all the time. Like you want that to be like, she was one of the most driven, creative, energizing people I ever met. She got the best out of me. I did the best work of my life. She was also one of the kindest people. That's what I want to make sure is sticking as I go along. And I'm not done with that.
Yeah. Isn't there a positive correlation between thinking about death a lot and being happy?
I don't know. In which case, Ireland is the happiest place on the planet. Because we are morbid as hell. We love death. Like we love a good wake. It's the best party you'll ever go to.
Oh my gosh. Do you start every board meeting with something that each person's grateful for?
Yes. How do you know that?
I found it online. Actually, I don't know where I found that, but I found it.
Yeah. It's just a headspace thing. Like if you...
I swear that's not insider info.
No. If you do any meeting, but particularly one where you think it's going to be, I hate to use the word contentious, but it's going to be fast-paced, tough meeting. Doesn't mean it's contentious bad, but it's going to be a lot of, if you get people into a zone of gratefulness, they kind of are much more open to solving problems instead of just coming myopically with like their fiefdom. Like, I want to get this thing done. And so I just think it's a great practice. I do it with my board for sure. And they get weirded out, super weirded out, because there's a lot of them are like, I don't know, I'm grateful that my company went public last week. I'm like, that can't be what you're grateful for. And then they start to break down over time and they're like grateful that their kid just had an amazing something or other. And they start to show up to each other as humans, which I think is important if you're building a team. Like you have to find some basis where we all see each other as people we'd want to be in a team with, not just like individuals that are good at what they did and kind of ended up in this room. And then the same is true for your leadership team or any team you're on, but like particularly leadership team. The more stressful the meeting is about to be, the more likely I am to start by saying, hey, let's just have a quick moment around the room. Like, what was something great that happened this weekend, or what are we really grateful for?
How would that go if you brought it into like Walmart? If you were like, guys, let's start the board meeting this way.
Walmart, it would be fine.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. Because Walmart is an incredibly human company. They are salt of the earth people.
Yeah.
And Sam really instilled that in people. Sam Walton, yes. No ego in this room, right? We are all just here to do the best for our customers, right? To help people save money and live better. And that is humble. It's very, it lacks any pretense. So I think having a moment of gratefulness, it has a family feel to it, actually.
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate you doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to this. And I truly was devastated about the idea that maybe I was going to not be able to do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I cannot wait to see what you do next. I cannot wait. I cannot wait.
Me too. Tell me if you know.
The only thing I've been distracted with in this entire conversation is companies in my head that I think you would be a great fit for. I wrap all of these things the same. When you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
When I hear the word grit, I think of the pushing through despite the odds. I think it comes from a place of humility where your ego doesn't get in the way. I actually think of it as a place where things like kindness can actually come to the fore. You might not think about it, but I think those are the moments that create loyalty that we talked about earlier. And I also think it's like an internal drive that can't be taught, can be forged over time, but is just inherent in who we are.
Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to come back every Monday morning to listen to a new guest, or go back into the archives when we've done more than 100 episodes. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and the episode was edited by Eric Johnson from Lightning Pod. Thank you all.